My guest today is an entrepreneur, author, coach, great thinker, and friend. One of the most brilliant people that I know of in my circle of friends and colleagues. I've been fortunate enough to know him for over 25 years, and he is someone who thinks profoundly about concepts of anti-fragility, agility, resilience, and a host of related concepts having to do with ecosystems that we build in organizations and in society as well. So I hope you'll welcome me. Kalisa, let's run the opening. I hope you'll welcome him, rather. I am Todd Nilson with Clocktower Advisors, your host on Talk About Your Community. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. I'm very glad you tuned in. If you've never tuned into the Talk About Your Community show before, I try to bring in a variety of guests who have perspectives, expertise, ideas outside of the online community builder space to bring their wisdom to us so that we can grow and learn and do more amazing things within this professional space. And if you are encountering the idea of building communities online and offline for the first time, you are likely to encounter some other people on this stream and in my YouTube channel who are community builders by trade. This is a profession that has really taken off since I'll say around 2010 timeframe, maybe a bit earlier than that in enterprises, and has really kind of found its feet as a go-to-market strategy for many organizations, and I think it will be increasingly so as we do that. Before I bring Sai up on stage, just wanted to note we are lining up guests for the May timeframe here, and we'll be publishing that schedule rather soon. If you have an idea for a guest, or if you'd like to be a guest, definitely invite you to reach out to me via private message, or Kalisa, who is my show runner and erstwhile engineer working in the background to make us look good. Again, always looking for people who have a perspective on the idea of what brings people together. How do we create trust? How do we help people to co-create and collaborate effectively with each other in online spaces? So without further ado, I want to bring Sai up on stage here. Sai, my excellent friend. It's been too long since we last chatted with each other. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Indeed, it's been too long. It's so wonderful to see you and so wonderful to be with you. There's only one thing more wonderful that I can imagine is being with you in person. So I'll put it that way. So thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, absolutely, man. So good to see you. We used to be in the same neck of the woods in the Wisconsin, Illinois markets, which is where we met so many years ago. You're in Texas these days. Is that right?
So I'm actually back and forth now, Florida and Chicago. So
oh, really?
I jumped around, yeah. So Orlando and Chicago at this point. So
well, wonderful. So Sai, I mean, there's no way I'm going to be able to encapsulate your career and the things you've done, so I'm not even going to try. Could you maybe just say a little bit about your practice and the things that you're doing for organizations these days?
Definitely. Thank you so much for that, Todd. All around, the general sense that I like to look at myself really is a student of human nature and human dynamics in the context of the human condition. What that really means is dealing with people, if you will, ultimately, and business organizations and the business realities that they face. So a lot of what I focus on really is coaching people to improve and transformation, changing authentic DNA. It's not simply let's change a process or change a structure, change the DNA of an organization and everything involved in that, all the way from strategy to execution to everything in between. I've been doing it for far too long, is what I like to say. So over 4 decades, hundreds of organizations, thousands of people that I've had the opportunity to learn from and really co-create with. And then at the end of the day, it really comes back to the human element. And that's one thing I love about, what you do and what you foster, because that brings it all together at the end of the day.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. And I mean, you are one of the people that I regularly refer to as part of my brain trust. I look to you for inspiration and ideas, and to really kind of shake up old ways of thinking, and move me in new directions. You were the guy that originally turned me on to John Boyd, and agile thinking and OODA loops and all of that world. And of course, like over the years, that evolved into things like cultural literacy of organizations, um, uh, transformation, kind of work, and then introducing me to ideas about resilience and anti-fragility over time as well. And so I've always tried to think judiciously about how these concepts apply to community building, whether online or off. It doesn't really matter so much. And so there are some unique struggles with online communities, though, where I end up trying to think about how do we apply things more thoughtfully so that we can have an impact and effect on people. Because some of the things you mentioned in your introduction are sort of what you try to do, try to create that authentic change in DNA, requires an establishment of trust and intent. So like a lot of times I'll talk about with online communities in particular, because you don't have that face-to-face element. It's a text first kind of environment. How do you establish that sense of trust? And it's got to happen at a technical infrastructure level. Like, are these platforms trustworthy to begin with? Is this a contemporary web experience? Does it give me confidence that this is a okay place for me to give my login credentials even? Yeah. And then who's running this thing? What is this organization all about? What is their intent for holding this space for me? And then at that individual level of like, hey, can I trust the other people in this space? Do they have the same intents or interests as me? And not to say that it needs to be homogenous in intent, but there needs to at least be some level of affinity, I feel like, for those spaces to succeed. And I see you doing this in your practice in organizations at a fundamental level. Like a lot of times, like organizations will come to me and they'll hire me because they want to implement a community for their customers or something like that. And often I will run smack into cultural barriers with the organization overall. So I'm kind of wondering, and sorry for the long preamble for this, forgive me, my friend, but I'm kind of wondering, like, what kinds of things you do to help organizations recognize that they need to change and to be more open and collaborative in what they do.
So there's no rambling happening. No, that perfect setup in terms of the conversation. Because I'll tell you, the communities have been, as I've mentioned, and I worked heavily with two other gentlemen that I definitely want to mention, Mark Ferraro and Brad Barton, who likewise have a tremendous respect in what you do, Todd. And the secret sauce for change has been communities, in particular, in our vernacular. Before it became popularized, and now it's very much popularized. But even as we observe it, there's some of the fundamentals that are amiss, respectfully, for a lot of folks, is what I would say. Everything also, and you've heard me use this word before. I am a pracademic. I do not just deal with theory, and I do not just deal with practice, but I deal with and dabble with both. And I think you're the same way, Todd, quite honestly, because that's one attraction. When you and I met, I had an affinity to you because of that. So I think one thing that at the crux of it is there's a curiosity and there's a creativity that comes to play. So when we're working with organizations or what have you, or if I'm on a platform, right? And then how curious is the platform about me? If it's overly curious, if the platform asks me too many questions before I can actually enter the platform, well, then maybe that's intrusive. So too many questions, you can actually be too curious about a person who's potentially joining a community. There's a delicate balance. So the curiosity is one aspect. It's much more readily doable when you're on site together in a location. When we're talking here through the medium, one thing, the feedback that I get a lot of times is, Sai, you're very quiet. And here's the thing that I come back with is, I'm quiet because I'm listening to you intimately. Now, to demonstrate that, it's just not me being quiet. It's me taking the anchors that you provide in that conversation and dialogue, and then anchoring myself to them and building the relationship with those anchors. Like whatever word that you use, I can use it as an anchor if I want to advance the relationship through whatever medium. Can I add, if you will, I want to add just a few more things if you don't.
Please. Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. And I love pracademic as a term. I always say, strategy without practice is dead. And that absolutely resonates with me and everything that I've tried to do in my work.
And honestly, it's rare that you find people, it's very rare that you find people that can build bridges from both sides, from theory and practice. And those that can, I've been doing this for over 40 years. Those that can, I would classify less than 10 people I've met in my time. And someone could say, well, Sai, you haven't had that much exposure. And I would call, I would say, no, I've had a lot of exposure, but they're hard to find. So if you don't mind, Todd, the community aspect is so crucial and has been, it is the uncharted frontier that we are encountering. And here's what I mean by that. And I'm going to be very, very specific. And I can give many stories of what around this. Corporations have been sold the idea of teams. But if you look at human history and how we've evolved as human beings, we actually didn't have teams. The caveman and cave woman and cave people did not have teams. They actually had communities. And then they spawned these concepts, but they weren't necessarily teams. The long-lived aspect was a community. And the community is powerful because it's identity of people that is embedded in that community. It's all based on identity. And I'm referencing where this really originated from with Etienne Wenger's work around communities and Jean Lave, if you will. It's all embedded in terms of identity, and that's the way we have evolved. And there's different ways of saying, so what organizations do? I'm rambling a little bit, but bear with me.
Not at all. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. This is great. Yeah.
What organizations do is they say, well, we need to talk about teams and we need to get teams in place. And then they say we have to have long-lived teams. Well, the reality is, and then they force people's identity and manifest from the teams. It doesn't work that way. People's identities are manifested in communities. And then and I love this, if you will, and I love it. I'm using that in double quotes. Then they bring in a whole bunch of training. Then they bring in a whole bunch of coaches to work with these teams to get them to improve. Well, the reality is, introduce communities and unleash people to achieve their own improvements versus try to bring in those intrusive pieces.
If I could introduce something, you shared a couple of articles with me a month or two ago about ecosystem thinking. James Moore, 2 articles by him on ecosystem thinking, and the one that I spent a lot of time on this past week was all about. It was a case study. It was called the human ecosystem, and it was all about the Alhir group in China as an organization, and sort of the non-hierarchical nature of that. I think it exemplifies what you're talking about. Like, rather than being a command and control, org-charted, structured organization. And again, I don't know anything about the Alhir group. I'm not saying I love them or hate them or anything like that. There's probably a little bit of propaganda built into it because it's China. But, in any case, what was so intriguing to me was their whole idea of organizing, not teams, but allowing what they called micro enterprises to come together and form. And I think what they were describing was self-forming communities that then became part of this ecosystem, connected with other parts of the organization, other people in the organization that fulfilled a variety of different features. That it actually became a living ecosystem resembling a biosystem, or it was really
very much,
yeah,
very much so. And please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying teams are bad. No, you need teams, but we need to balance our identity. It originates in community. and then teams become the outreach. So the ecosystem approach and ecosystem thinking, if you will, as I like to say, the ecosystem paradigm, ecosystem thinking, and I can get into very specifics, but we've used that very crucially, and credit to Mark Ferraro. When we do it, Mark Ferraro likes to call it rebirthing the organization so that it can have that fluidity and that flexibility to deal with whatever challenges are there. And fundamentally, at that point, you can go ahead and allow a degree of fluidity across the enterprise using teams and communities. You can allow a degree of focus based on market opportunities and how we contribute value. And at the same time, we talk about self-organization, truly provide the context for self-organization to manifest. And there are some people that have difficulty with what self-organization means, or respect, as I've said it very openly. Some groups can't self-organize themselves out of a paper bag because it's been taken out of us, through our evolution and our maturation in society. And I think you've heard me say, we're over domesticated animals nowadays. And we need to become less domesticated, rewild, to be able to tap into how we operate within an ecosystem, to be able to reach out to each other, ping each other in text.
That term is so interesting to me, and it came up a couple of shows ago when I had Sahana Chattopadhyay come back on the show, and just sort of talking about we need to rewild our organizations, and sort of thinking about, like, what does that mean exactly? What does it mean to rewild something? And for me, like, and give me a corrective or give me a reflection on sort of what this is. Like that whole idea of rewilding is to stop trying to legislate things from happening within organizations or communities. It's got to be people's own idea. They need to have the autonomy to make decisions about sort of where they're going to put their effort, as long as they know what the intent is of that group or that organization overall. So there's a community I've been involved with, and there's been some sort of feeling behind the scenes. It's an online community. I'm not going to say anything about who or what it is, but the person running it, I think, comes out of an operational command and control background, and it's becoming very apparent to people in the space that it's kind of hardlining like a lot of things about the ways that people are supposed to do things in the community. And I understand that the intent is to create a space where people will have to come back to a centralized place to do things, and they'll have to behave in certain ways so that it's respecting, the group. But it's coming off as it's my way or the highway within that space. And to me, sort of that sense of rewilding would be like, hey, it's that old song lyric, hold on loosely, but don't let go, right? That we need to be a little more open to things growing organically, within spaces. Am I thinking about this in the right sort of fashion?
Very, very much so. And if you're okay, I'm going to put a little bit more language around kind of what you said, if that's all right.
Please.
So, and you used one keyword, intent, already. So if we acknowledge that we all have our identity, and we don't even know ourselves, quite honestly, there's different aspects of one's identity, right, that manifest in context. At home, when I'm with Nora, my daughter, if you will, there's a different set of aspects that emerge from my identity. When I'm with a client, a different set of aspects are going to emerge. When I'm online, a whole different aspects with a client versus in person. So identity is a very, very crucial component of all this. And we truly do not have an understanding of our own identity. So that's one aspect. I'm going to tie this directly to the scenario that you provided, Todd. The next piece of this is we all have a different will. We all have a different intent, if you will. So how do we manifest our will in the world becomes a key question for any identity. As I like to say, we all want to be immortal, and we're trying to figure out how to be immortal in some capacity, leave a lasting impression. Some people gravitate toward having children. Some people gravitate toward their profession in writing or publishing. Some people, quite honestly, gravitate toward nothing, and that's okay. That's their decision. So on the flip side of it, we all have limited energy. So I can only apply my energy in a limited way based on my will, right, to manifest my identity. Now, that's a whole Respect, that's a whole bunch of psychology and sociology blended all together to distill a very, very key concept there. What is interesting now, and my father actually said this to me when I was very young. He said, I don't want you to believe in power. I want you to first believe in energy and then believe in power. Because power is really nothing more than the exercise of energy in the context of my identity. Mm-hmm. So bring a few of these things together. The cycle that we are caught up in historically, Todd, and this goes directly to, and so this is going to give the definition of rewilding that I've really anchored to. We are in a vicious reality control cycle. That's the historical precedent. What does that mean? I want to impose my will in the environment. I want to impose my will in what I do. I want to make the rules. I want to define the process. I want to define the organizational structure. That's a manifestation of will, if you will, defining an organizational structure. When CEOs come into their role, or we talk about the word transformation, a transformation is a redistribution, a recontextualization, a reconfiguration of power. That's what a transformation is. Gary Hamel said a transformation, if you're doing a transformation, it's already too late in one of his resilience paper. I think his original resilience paper. I'm missing the quote right now. But if you begin to look at the world through that concept of identity and communities and what have you, and transformation, and we truly are in this vicious reality control cycle. Give me more metrics, Todd. Why? Because the more metrics you give me, I think I may be able to make a better decision. Gosh, Todd, do you really think so? Is your ego that high that you think the more information Todd's going to give you? That's a very, very destructive place. So now what is the shift? What does rewilding now have to do? Rewilding says, okay, acknowledge this vicious reality control cycle, and I can elaborate in many ways. But what we need to do is change that into a virtuous reality navigation cycle. How do I navigate reality? How do I work with the energy? That's the virtuous aspect of it. Work with the energy. Don't simply try to abuse power or leverage power to get what you want. That's where we use the words like anchor. What are the anchors that you're working with? Where are the points of energy that you need to work with? Those are anchors. And how do you navigate the environment? And I know people, I'll pause here in a minute, if you will. So rewilding is that paradigm shift through ecosystems. Bear with me. I realize I've been talking and rambling for a bit. If people hear this and say, well, none of this sounds practical. Look at all the case studies. Look at all the things that I've done with people. I don't take credit for any of it, quite honestly. They've done the heavy lifting. That is the manifestation of that kind of shift in thinking. And we can get very, very practical.
It's virtuous reality. How did you phrase that?
We need to shift from a vicious reality control cycle. That was kind of the old world. The two world, the ecosystem world, is really a virtuous reality navigation cycle. You have to navigate. And I've published on this, I've written on it, but that is a very crucial paradigm shift that, quite honestly, when I work with executive leaders, it's okay to have wants and needs. Ego is not all negative. There has to be enough ego to maintain integrity and operate within the environment. But that shift is a very, very crucial shift to ecosystem thinking.
That strikes home with me really powerfully, because again, the same community, one of my friends, a colleague, had been doing work with this group and decided to pull back on her efforts with it, because she felt that she was being told too directly, what you must do this thing next, do this, as opposed to hey, we're exploring how to do this thing. What do you think? There's a very big difference on how you phrase that kind of activity, and it's something that's always sort of been in the back of my mind, because I've worked with and dealt with a lot of volunteer-run kinds of organizations. You can't run a volunteer organization with command and control mindset. It doesn't work, because people say, I'm out of here. I'm giving my time to this. If you're going to tell me how to do it and you're not trusting me to try to make good decisions and move things forward in a way that makes sense, I'm done. I'm just out of this space. And I think organizations that have traditionally been command and control like that for their entire lives, would do well to think in terms of employees being volunteers,
Yes.
that because in essence, that's what we are. We, like I was a recruiter for many years before I moved into this community building space. And this has always been at the top of my mind. Like, I don't work for you. I choose to work with you because there's something about the vision or what you're trying to do that I'm willing to invest part of my mortal life
Yes.
in doing. And that means my talent, my energy, to your point, and my joy, hopefully. That doesn't mean you get to tell me what to do. Doesn't mean you're my boss. I'm not in a military unit where I have to do exactly what and I think military units are increasingly about, creating autonomy. At the same time, that old model doesn't even exist anymore, I feel like.
Yeah, very much so. Todd, what you just shared is literally what Drucker emphasized on how to build great organizations and impactful organizations. And he actually said one of the best organizations was the Girl Scouts, if I'm recollecting correctly. Exactly, because it's a volunteer, respectfully, army of people. And there's two questions that if you don't mind, I'll kind of share. There's two questions that I always pose to myself, and then I pose it in a lot of the coaching that I do, especially at the executive level. And these are not to be handled carelessly, respectfully. But the first question is, how much of your soul are you willing to sell? That is a very pointed question. The individual that you mentioned, that I think you said she decided to disengage, she said, I am not going to sell my soul, also connected to identity. It doesn't serve what my intent is. It doesn't serve my identity, so I can disengage. That's a fundamental question. There's leaders in organizations, when they think about the hierarchy, well, I'm not promoted enough. And I always tell them, that's okay. That's okay. Just answer the question, because now they begin to recognize, well, maybe I need to sell less of my soul or more of my soul. And I'm not saying that you got to sell more of your soul to get promoted. So please, folks shouldn't carry that message. The next question is, and this is, again, a highly personal question, is what feeds your soul? Because if you're not getting what feeds your soul and you're overselling your soul, your identity dissipates and you disappear. And that's a shame on you, because the world needs your voice. And those are crucial aspects. So I applaud the person you mentioned, respectfully.
Yeah, those are powerful questions. I'll be sure to pass along your compliments to her. She'll appreciate that. That's wonderful stuff. I wonder if we could maybe shift the conversation a little bit to the whole idea of ecosystems and ecologies. This has been there's an area of conversation within the community builder space that talks about if we're trying to build online communities and connections between people, we kind of need to go where people are, wherever their watering holes happen to be. Yeah. And I can see that thinking to a certain extent, but where I struggle with it, where I continue to struggle with it, and then I don't want to get into fistfights over it with anybody, but where I start thinking about that is if yes, people may be congregated at this casino over here.
Yeah.
And they may be having wonderful, energetic conversations in the casino. Do I want to build a community in the casino where there are millions of distractions and mirrors and enticements for me to do and get pulled into other things? So I feel like in terms of digital ecosystems, and I like the stuff from James Moore, talking about sort of like business, like a business and all of its like upstream and downstream, connections and capabilities. I'm thinking in terms of Facebook and LinkedIn and private online discussion forums and WhatsApp and Slack. These all seem like different ecologies to me that are more or less conducive to building those senses of community, especially a sense of identity and trust within those spaces. And identity is such a slippery thing online. As you said, we don't have a great sense of who we are, even in person necessarily, but that idea of online identity is very fluid. On Facebook, I identify as a Dungeons and Dragons gamer and a family member. But on LinkedIn, yeah, I'm a bit of there's a bit of my life mixed in there, but there's also, my professional career and my mercantile endeavors and things that I do. And so you're interacting with different aspects or elements of me here. So I've definitely struggled with that idea of these different spaces, but am I thinking about them incorrectly as ecologies, or like what?
You're not at all. Forgive me if you had more. I don't want to interrupt you if you had more before I
No, I do. So I mean, you're getting my personal anxiety about this as a question, because I don't want to come back and say like, well, there's no such thing as community everywhere. It's not to say that you can't build a community in a parking lot if that's where everybody is and where they want to be and where their identities are conducive to creating that sense of connection and belonging. But is it, like, not all environments are created equal for these things?
I think that's beautifully said, Todd. And here's the reason, if you don't mind me kind of elaborating as to why I'm saying that. And I have, very honestly, since as the community movement has started, I've actually shied away from it. And the reason I've shied away from it is, I'm going to share explicitly why. We've used communities for ages. It's been the secret sauce. Just like the word catalyst, we've used it for ages. All of a sudden now everybody's a catalyst. Or everybody's talking about the word edge. It's like, where the hell was, excuse my language, where the hell were you 30 years ago? This stuff is, or complexity. Complexity is another one. We've been about applying complexity and leveraging it for ages. This is not coming from ego. This is coming from practice and actuality. But here's the interesting point that you're emphasizing. This is what I tell people. I want to go back. I'll go back to ecosystems, but I want to go back to community first and then tie it to the ecosystem piece of it. People are redefining the terms, and they're doing it under the guise of we're evolving the term. Not at all. Start with the 1 + 1 will always be 2. Start with the fundamentals. Don't redefine the term to suit your purpose and call it we're evolving the practice. That's nonsense to me. That's a lack of integrity, quite honestly. So if we will go back to the essence of the definition of community, as we referenced, if you will, a community has 3 key aspects. The first one is a joint domain. What domain are you? We could talk about communities of interest, communities of practice, communities of purpose. What domain are you focused on? What is your commitment to that domain? That's where your identity is rooted. So the word commitment comes right to identity, and it was joint enterprise is the actual formal term that was used. That's one aspect. The other aspect is there mutual engagement? Is there a sharing and learning? If there's no mutual engagement, there isn't going to be a community. And there are technological mechanisms to support us, right? We've used all sorts of mechanisms. Respectfully, you introduced me to StreamYard, which I had not used before, and you said, "Hey, give it a shot." If we did not have mutual engagement, I would have never learned that, very openly, potentially never learned it. So that mutual engagement, joint enterprise, mutual engagement is the formal term. The third one is really a shared repertoire at that point. How are we building those assets, those elements, that language that we could use? That's the core of community. So if we think about it, it's easy to say, well, community is everywhere, but what intent is really being served? What interest? And to be very blunt, and I don't know any, respectfully, all these people that you might be, referencing, or what, I don't know anything about your world beyond what I love about you and our interactions, if you will. But I would say, so what's your intent? Is it to make a profit off of starting a community in a casino, or is it something else? What passion does it serve? Because that's really the core of a community, is its passion. What passion does it serve? Now, if you take that core definition, and none of this is mine, this goes back to the references that we've mentioned with Vinger and what have you. But now if you bring these into the ecosystem context, ecosystems, and this is, again, some of the paper, and this is coming, these are, I like to call the 5 C's and the 5 E's of ecosystems. If you think about an ecosystem very explicitly is a configuration of stuff, of people, of things. Communities are a part of that configuration. By the core definition, an enterprise can be considered a constellation of communities that spawn teams that
Yeah.
spawn teams that are short-lived to achieve a particular objective and go back to the constellation. These are not my words. This goes back to Wenger's words. Literally, he defined the word constellation in his book. That's the key word. So if we think in constellations, that's essentially what an ecosystem begins to manifest. It's a configuration that is always dynamic, or I like to say always in reconfiguration. The second aspect of it, there's an enterprise to it. An enterprise is a community that has coherence. What brings us together, Todd? That's really what community of interest, community of practice, community of purpose, whatever language we use.
We have something we're trying to achieve, right? Yeah, there's some shared value, goal, interest that is bringing us together, and that's why we talk excitedly about those things when we get together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The third is experience. The experience that we have is, and this is very, very key, is a calibration and a recalibration continuously with reality. Because what you and I have a great conversation, right? You go and do something, I go and do something, you discover something that works, right? You share it back, and then I learn from it. I go do something, I learn something different, I share it back, and that experience is very, very powerful. That calibration with reality is another aspect of ecosystems. And then you if you will continue, there's a sense of explorership that comes into play. That's extremely key. There's a sense not only of explorership, of being entrepreneurs that comes into place. I mean, these are very different. These are very different thoughts from an ecosystem view. I've seen this in a lot of places. When I mention the word community, or when I mention the word ecosystem, a lot of people think it's about networking. Not at all. Networks are about relationships. Relationships are a key component, but that's not the same thing as an ecosystem. Or value chains. That's not the same thing as an ecosystem. It's much, much broader than that alone. And people always say, well, okay, when you talk about navigation, what does that really mean? How do you navigate in an environment? That seems like such an overloaded word. I can tell you very explicitly, the way you navigate an environment is three pieces: the conversations you have, the relationships you establish, and the behavior manifest. That's the way you navigate. As you said in the beginning, that's the way when we're working with clients, that's the way we're navigating to spawn off, discover communities. And when you discover them, we call it a nucleus. And again, this is a lot of the fundamentals, respectfully, and I'm rambling. Discover a nucleus. Yeah. Once you discover the nucleus, feed that flame and let it turn into a fire. If it turns into a fire, then at that point, it's magnificent. It'll come and go. It's fluid. If it doesn't manifest into a flame, that's okay. It's very different than a team. It's very different than, that's the other aspect. Let me mention one thing and I'll pause, if you will. Forgive me. It got me very excited.
No, that's awesome, man. I love it.
We try to formalize communities. As soon as communities become formalized as part of the organization, at that point, you've destroyed a lot of the magic. And people will disagree with me as, no, they need to become formalized. Not at all. There's degrees of formalization, but not to such a degree that it kills the magic, the flame, the passion, right? The awe that is driving that sense of identity.
I love that. I'll relate it to a personal experience in the online gaming world that I had, very early on. I was involved in a beta release of an online multiplayer role-playing game, and in the early days of the game, in that beta release, where the early energy came from was everybody hanging out in the kitchen area of the castle and just chatting with each other, and it was powerful and interactive, and people were making up stories, and it was very rich. It was a very rich experience for that one, which I'll carry with me through for all of my days. Friendships that I made there. In fact, one of them is on the stream right now, Peter Corliss, who knows what I'm talking about. That there was tremendous energy in those early days. As soon as other parts of that castle opened up in the game, the energy was diffused. People were everywhere, and it was almost like it was overbuilt over time. And there were a variety of reasons why I don't think it necessarily took off. Well, Peter likes what I said there, but anyways, I think this happens a lot of times in community build-outs, where I see where they will over-engineer the number of channels or groups at the outset, because they feel like and this happens especially in big enterprises. Well, we need a separate discussion area for every one of our products. No, you don't. You really don't. Because if people are excited and talking about your products, you don't want to legislate that you can't talk about this topic over here when it should be over here. If you start doing that, you end up in this calcified structure that nobody's going to use, because immediately the people coming into that space, instead of being excited about the topics and the ideas and the things that they want to interact with, they are worried about where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to put? And like, as soon as that self-consciousness happens, conversation dies in the space.
That's a perfect example, Todd, where and no one is saying we have to have enough stability in our environment to navigate. We can't just have chaos. And sometimes you have to operate in chaos. I'll put it that way. But exactly what you just pointed out is what I had mentioned about people going back to the vicious reality control, if you will, paradigm. We need to have that. We need to legislate that topic over here. We need to legislate what topics. We need to determine what you can talk about, if you will. If you don't mind, can I share another sort of client scenario that?
Yeah, please. I'm loving this conversation. It's great, my friend.
You're very kind. Likewise, man. Likewise. So I worked, and I have to mention Brad Barton and Mark Ferraro likewise, because they were instrumental in this. But we had worked in an engagement, and we had we'll leave all the names out, but there were multiple communities, and they're focused on adding value, etc. And we noticed one community that had, for lack of any other words, had gone rogue. And at that point, so notice we had embraced the reality navigation paradigm. So we're navigating. We're not trying to control anything. That's very key. The organization had embraced that, but this community had gone rogue. So we have to have hygiene, right? Our immune system is very, very powerful to maintain hygiene, etc., and health. So one community had gone rogue, and essentially, I'll say the immune system picked it up. The immune system was me being able to walk around and kind of just notice it. I pulled the gentleman in, and essentially it had gone rogue. These folks were respectfully very toxic relative to the organization. They were talking bad. They were feeding each other's frustrations, negativity. So communities can go rogue. They just like teams, etc. So what do you do now? Well, we have to intervene as an immune system to help the organization and help the community heal. So there was interventions that were manifested within a month, essentially. You'll love this. The community had created a charter, had presented the charter to the CEO, and reconnected itself to the organization in a healthy way within a month. Amazing. Thank you. And that's literally what I said. And I take no credit. I give all the credit to Mark and Brad for doing it. But communities can go astray, and we can help reintegrate them into the whole in the same way. And they have their own life cycle, right? They're born, they go through life, and some can die away. But that was a very, 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 very powerful. This is multiple decades back. I'll say probably 3 decades.
But that whole idea of like communities that sort of, turn inward on themselves or turn bad, like this is something that is a key topic for us today, where I think there is a tipping point or a distinction between what is a community and what is a cult, essentially. Yes. And it has to do with the permeability of ideas into a given community, I feel. And if a community becomes so impermeable, and it becomes about sort of the purity of the individuals within that space, it can become sort of this monster negatively feeding itself, and leading to its own destruction over time. And so you didn't tell me, well, what I suspect happened with that turnaround was that you Mark or the individuals who were working with them got them to start thinking about like where they actually did have commonalities with the broader organization, or they did care about things, and got them to start seeing how they might fit in and affect some positive change through their own new charter that they created.
It's reconnection. Exactly. Yeah. When I dealt with this and I've studied it. Cancer is a great subject to study if people want to understand transformation and change. And I'll tie it back. Forgive me if I interrupted you, Todd.
No, not at all.
A cell goes cancerous when it loses its identity. That's the fundamental definition of cancer. And I'm not a physician, so just from the research that I've done over many, many years, if you will, as well as the bouts that I've had with that thing. But nonetheless, it loses identity, so it starts to proliferate, the negativity. It disconnects from the whole, and that becomes the problematic piece of it. The aspect, and I love the word that you use, the purity. If it tries to become too pure, it becomes destructive, very destructive. When we talk about the agility, resilience, and anti-fragility, agility is about responsiveness. The community has to be responsive. It's a core function as being responsive within the enterprise, as well as for the enterprise to be responsive to the environment. It has to be, if you will, it has to achieve continuity with resilience. That's what helps. The purity piece of it, the anti-fragility piece, directly ties to the growth, healthy growth of a community, because you need to expose yourself to ideas. You need to challenge yourself. You need to find stress, seek stresses that allow us to grow. As soon as you don't seek stresses, it begins to break down. So I love the introduction of the word purity, and then really circling full ways back to agility, resilience, and anti-fragility. Exactly as you mentioned, Todd.
So that's amazing. Side note. Thank you. I wanted to pause because Peter has had some really great comments to share here. I want to put them up on the screen here, as we're kind of edging towards the top of the hour here. He was talking about sort of this was the community everywhere conversation, that it's a Moses problem. You have to take them where they are today and have a plan to lead them to your promised land. It's interesting. Some in our space have argued that you don't really need a promised land. You don't need a place to lead them to. Just be with them where they are, and that's going to be okay. But where they are might be the desert, right? Yeah. So absolutely, I appreciated that. And then the other item, this was great. Zip's law of distribution. 90% of the conversations happen in the general channel, right? Yes. So it's sort of part of that art and science of knowing when to open up another channel, for conversation, and that is a bit of a judgment call. It feels like
very much. And I applaud your work, quite honestly, Todd. This area, the space is, forgive me, I interrupted you. I don't know if you had more before.
No, you're great.
I really applaud your work, because it's innovative. This space is forming, and there's a lot of opportunity. I challenge folks to keep in mind, be pracademics. Don't just focus on theory, because theory and practice doesn't work, and practice and theory doesn't work. You got to mix them together. Be pracademics. And you've heard me say a lot of things. With all due respect to all listeners, all people, what have you, I've got a background that I can stand on everything I've said, if you will. And people will tell me, you're unconventional and you're orthodox, but you do deliver. So there's something you must be doing. And I've had a lot of misses, right? I mean, I've had a lot of failures, we can call them that. So believe me, this is not coming from ego, but I really love what you do, because you are pushing the edges. You are a pioneer, you're a pracademic, and likewise, continue to do what you're doing, man, all around.
You're very kind to say so. I'm one in a crowd of people that love this space and want the best for it, and see the value of extending beyond our physical boundaries, communities into virtual spaces, because it increases the number and depth of connections that we can have over time. And hopefully we can live and create more joyfully together through that process. So I always appreciate your words, Sai, and the inspiration that you give me every time we have a conversation. It usually leads to a lot of other conversations at the same time. So so glad.
Sentiments mutual, my friend, all around. Sentiments completely mutual.
So if someone wants to continue the conversation with you, I know you're quite active on LinkedIn. You've got an amazing series on the art of war that's been ongoing. Some truly interesting stuff, and I know you've made a life study of Sun Tzu and art of war, and I'm always interested in things you've got to say in that space as well.
Thank you so much. Definitively, there is it's core to a lot of the things that I've mentioned. There's other things that are more core. I'll be very, very honest about it. But definitively, it's one reference. And as I like to say, my practice has really been built atop of Sun Tzu. And it is, and and it is a very, very delicate subject, but a very rich subject that applied in the appropriate way. It's amazing how it reconnects us to our own humanity and allows us to be the best that we can be. And, you know, I'm up. People can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm respectfully a cheerleader, cheering for Todd and all the good work you're doing, man, just all around. So please continue.
Mutually so. And Sai, I wish you all the best and new worlds of wonder for you as you encounter the world. Hope to have you back on the show again sometime soon. In the meantime, for those of you who tuned in, during the stream here, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. And if you have questions for Sai, I'm sure he'd be happy to jump on a chat with you and continue the conversation. Maybe even suggest some reading. I always get great reading suggestions from you, Sai. And in the meantime, we will get a schedule posted up for May for the live streams. Again, we do those every other week on a Friday at 10 a.m. U.S. Central Time. And in the meantime, please take time for yourselves, because if you're not good to yourself, you won't be any good to anybody else. And keep building great communities. Kalisa, let's roll the credit. See you in 2.
Thank you.